welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In the series on sociological research method, in today's lecture we're going to discuss on analyzing data through quantitative research. Now in social sciences we use both quantitative and qualitative research methodology to analyze our data. In today's lecture we're going to focus on understanding what is quantitative research, how it is carried out, what are the advantages and disadvantages of doing quantitative research. So to begin with, we try to understand that there has been a long-standing debate between quantitative and qualitative research in the social science. Mostly the debate revolves around technical questions about which method is better suited for certain research topics. However, at the same time, it is deeply connected to broader philosophical issue. Now, many a time, the question that arises before a researcher is what methodology to use, whether to use quantitative research methods or qualitative research. And at the outset, the answer is to use depending on the nature of the research. But here, we try to understand that there is a philosophical reasons also behind this. And in that context, we know that quantitative research is usually exemplified by methods like survey and experiment, with surveys which is needed to collect large scale data, experiments where you need to kind of prove a hypothesis as true or false. Whereas qualitative research is associated with techniques like participant observation and in-depth unstructured interviews. Now the nature of the data to be collected varies. In the quantitative large-scale survey you need quantifiable data, numbers, numericals, whereas in the qualitative research through in-depth interviews and participant observation, the focus is to get more on the everyday practices or everyday way in which the social reality is lived. So, over the years there has been a growing interest in qualitative research approaches that reflects not only methodological consideration but also discussions about the underlying assumptions and philosophies guiding research in the social science. The philosophical interest in qualitative research is a relatively recent development within social science. Why? Because earlier much of the sociology was being disciplined, being grown or nurtured like a physical science as a science of society. So the focus was to get into numerical data. But since the coming in of interpretative approach, symbolic interactionism, the focus changes to understanding the cultural relativity, to understand social action as everyday relations, and therefore the focus shifts from quantitative research to qualitative research. While researchers have always recognized differences between approaches such as survey and participant observation, the primary focus used to be on the scientific rigor and methodological structure offered by survey. Now, when we try to understand both the quantitative and qualitative research, it's important that we first understand the nature of quantitative research. So, in sociology, quantitative research uses the social survey as a key method of data collection, and this has been exemplified by Hirsch's 1969 study on delinquency. Social survey generates quantifiable data from large representative sample to test theories or hypotheses in a scientific manner. Most survey uses a correlation or cross-sectional design, collecting data at one point in time to analyze relationship between variables. So, if we kind of look into the, say, census survey, you collect a large scale data through which cross-sectional correlations, comparisons can be done. In contrast, experimental design, a main quantitative method in social psychology, randomly assigns subjects to experimental and control groups, exposing the experimental group to a specific stimulus while the control group is not. So, the distinction is between the survey, which is more used in sociology, and the experimental design, which is used more in psychology. This random allocation and control over variables in experimental design allow researchers to attribute differences in outcome directly to the experimental treatment as other facts are held constant. So, there is a kind of an experiment which is conducted in which you have kind of the variables in terms of the dependent variable, independent variable, and only certain variables are subject to the experiment to see the effect of that experiment on the variable. A typical example might involve comparing task performance under conditions of autonomy versus close supervision with differences in results interpreted as effects of these conditions. Thus, social survey and experiment represent distinctive quantitative approach. Survey emphasizes observational correlation across population. The latter, that is the experimental design, emphasizes causal explanation through controlled conditions. While survey and experiments are the most prominent method of quantitative research, three other methods also exemplify this tradition in sociology. The first is the analysis of previously collected or secondary data such as official statistics on crime, suicide, unemployment, which can reveal pattern and relationship in large populations. So, basically on the basis of the study of secondary data, say through the data collected through census or through any other large organization connecting data, a researcher can do a review, do comparison and understand the rate of increase in crime or the rate of suicide, unemployment rate and similar similar quantifiable indicators. Durkheim, that is Emil Durkheim's analysis of suicide rate is a classical example of using secondary data to kind of do a comparative study. Second method which is used in quantitative research other than the survey and experimental design is structured observation, involves systematically recording behavior using predetermined categories or schedules and then quantifying the data as seen in the study of classroom interaction or bureaucratic consultation. The third method of quantitative research is content analysis. This refers to quantitative analysis of communication media like newspaper or television, systematically coding and counting content features to identify trends and patterns. This is widely used in media studies and other fields. These methods, that is through use of secondary data, through structured interviews or through the way of using content analysis, form the core of quantitative research strategies in sociology. Quantitative research is characterized by a specialized vocabulary, that is terms like variables, control, measurement and experiment. These are the concepts that you will see in any quantitative research. Now, these concepts closely resemble the language and logic of the natural sciences. This similarity is not accidental, as quantitative research in sociology is typically guided by the principle of the natural science model, specifically positivism. However, the standard and procedures of natural science serve as the epistemological benchmark for what is considered valid knowledge in the social sciences. The term quantitative research is somewhat misleading because the tradition encompasses far more than just generating numerical data. It includes a set of assumptions and rigorous methodology that reflect a deeper philosophy about how social realities should be studied. Now, first we have understood what is quantitative methods, what are the different ways in which quantitative research is used. Now, we will try to understand the critique of quantitative research, particularly from the qualitative tradition. Do not object to the use of numbers or measurement itself, but rather to the entire package of practices and assumptions derived from the application of natural science approach to the study of society. Quantitative researchers often appreciate the usefulness of some measurement, but raise concern about the appropriateness of imposing scientific models designed for natural phenomena onto complex social realities. Thus, the tension between quantitative and qualitative research lies not merely in data or measurement, but in the broader epistemological and methodological commitment embedded in each approach. Social scientists often borrow the approaches of natural scientists for several reasons, despite differences in subject matter. One reason is the undeniable success of the natural science in explaining the physical world, which sets a high standard for empirical knowledge. So, why is the need to kind of follow the physical science? And here we know that sociology, in the growth of sociology, initially it was the notion of positivism. Now, positivism was the attempt to build a science of society. So, it was focused to try kind of do the same thing that the physical science was doing to study the physical world. The same method could be used to understand the social world. Now, what was the reason to follow positivism? And that is, the notion of positivism is necessary to introduce in order to examine the precise nature of scientific method that forms the bedrock of quantitative research. The reason why students of society copy the approach of natural scientists are: number one, enormous success of the science. So, sociology is a younger discipline. So, physical sciences was already there, successful in terms of its research and understanding physical world. So, this success kind of could be one reason why the social science wanted to follow positivism. The second reason was influence of positivism. Writers subscribing to the doctrine of positivism hold that the natural science provide a standard for knowledge and their procedures are equally applicable to studying society. The third reason is policy relevant research and funding. Social scientists, in order to provide policy relevant research for governments or secure funding, have been compelled to adopt or display an aura of a supposedly scientific approach. Because the whole idea is that if you don't follow a scientific approach, then your research is questionable, it's not considered as authentic. So, you need certain concepts like control group, variables, independent variables to make the research appear more scientific. So, positivism is invariably credited with providing the outline of the social scientist understanding of what science entails, especially by the opponents of quantitative research. And therefore, in order to understand quantitative method, it is important that we try to understand the positive position, or we try to understand what is positivism, what were the objective, and that will help us to understand the quantitative research. So, the term positivism has generated considerable debate and confusion within the social sciences. In critiques of quantitative research, especially those that gained momentum during the 1960s and 1970s, positivists were often used loosely and pejoratively, leading to a loss of its precise meaning and value as a philosophical label. Even among serious writers, there is a significant disagreement about the essential component of positivism, with some scholars outlining many different versions of it. Despite these challenges, positivism fundamentally refers to a philosophy asserting that the scientific method is suitable for all forms of knowledge and provides clear guidelines for valid research practice. At its core, positivism prescribes the knowledge should be derived from observable, empirical data, preferably quantified, and stresses objectivity, neutrality, and generalizability, features that are foundational to quantitative research. So, there is a lot of similarity between positivism and quantitative research. And that is why it is important to understand that the quantitative research gained importance because of the positivist approach in sociology. To refer to quantitative research as founded on positivism is to claim that it aspires to the same standard and aims that define science in general. Now, let us understand some of the key principles of positivism. Number one, methodological monism or naturalism. The belief that the methods of natural sciences are suitable and applicable to the social science despite difference in subject matter like human thoughts, feelings and meanings. So, there is a lot of difference between the subject matter of physical science and social science. Yet, the argument was to have a common method to analyze data, and that is what is being referred as methodological monism. This uniqueness of human experience is not seen as an obstacle to using scientific method in social research. So, the fact that human beings can feel, express emotions are not something that are considered as hindrance in terms of understanding objective social reality. The second key principle of positivism is empiricism or phenomenalism. Only phenomena observable directly or indirectly through sensory experience can be considered valid knowledge. Metaphysical concepts such as feeling or subjective experience are excluded from scientific inquiry unless they can be observed or measured. The third principle of positivism is inductivism. Scientific knowledge is built by accumulating verified empirical fact which forms the base for theoretical framework. These facts often take the form of laws, established regularity derived from observation and experimentation. So, if we see Emil Durkheim's study, he kind of arrives at generalized law based on observation and of the way in which the solidarity is maintained in society or the moral order is maintained. The fourth principle of positivism is deductivism. Now, scientific theories provide the basis for deriving hypotheses about causal relationship which are then empirically tested. If hypotheses fail, the underlying theory must be revised, highlighting a process of scientific reasoning involving both induction and deduction. The fifth principle of positivism is value neutrality and separation of normative judgments. Positivism requires researchers to detach themselves from personal values to maintain objectivity. It also separates scientific knowledge, which can be empirically verified, from normative or value based statement, which positivism considers outside the scope of scientific investigation. These components collectively depict positivism as an epistemological stance endorsing science applicability to social phenomena through objective, empirical, and systematic investigation while excluding metaphysical and normative claims. Not every positivist adhere to all these principles uniformly, but the first two, that is methodological naturalism and empiricism, are generally central to most conceptions of positivism. Quantitative research and is kind of considered very similar to positivist position. So, this is kind of described as a rational, linear process with the following logical structure. Number one, theory determines problem. So, you have general theories which guide researchers to specific problem. So, any research proposal, there is a theoretical background. Now, keeping the theoretical background, the students or the researcher is supposed to understand the social problem. The second structure is the hypothesis derived. Hypothesis, which is kind of a tentative statement about a research, takes the form of expectation and causal connections between concepts and logically derived from the general theories. This is now known as deduction. Third component is operationalization. Concepts of an abstract require operational definition to allow for the measurement of their variation and covariation, that is phenomenalism and observability. The fourth component is data collection. Data collected using methods like social survey, experiment, and other methods. The fifth, after collecting the data, the researcher is supposed to do the data analysis. Now, data in quantitative research are analyzed to verify or reject the causal connections specified by the hypothesis. The last structure of a quantitative research is findings feedback. The resulting findings are observed by the theory that started the process, that is induction. This model displays characteristics of positivism such as the emphasis on observability and the presence of both deduction and induction in quantitative research. Now, this is an idealized model. The steps that we talked about is an idealized schema which demonstrates the core positive features. And what are the features? That is translating theories into observable measurement, emphasizing both induction and deduction, that is generalizing from data, and the deduction is testing specific hypotheses from theory, and treating research as an objective, value-free endeavor. However, this process, that is the idealized model, is often oversimplified in textbook and does not universally reflect how quantitative research actually proceeds. In reality, not all quantitative studies are primarily theory driven. For instance, we have Merton's, that is Robert K. Merton, middle range theory, which is neither grand theorization or neither based on empirical data. So, it is kind of a mid between theory and empirical reality. Now, the middle range theory bridges the gap between the grand abstract theory and concrete empirical findings. But many research projects are not directly guided by such theoretical framework. Platt's research also shows that there is not a straightforward correspondence between particular sociological theory like functionalism and specific quantitative methods such as survey. Overall, while the logical theory-driven model is a hallmark of positivist quantitative research, its actual application in sociology is often more varied and less strictly aligned with formal theory that textbooks suggest. The idealized model of quantitative research is often unrealistic. In practice, quantitative research tends to be more messier, involving false starts, unexpected findings, intuitive leaps, and serendipity that the neat model does not capture. Additionally, real world constraints such as limited resources and time strongly influence research design and execution. This rationalized version of the research process presents the research in a more logical and tidy fashion than it actually occurred. So, we kind of understand that what is quantitative research, we try to understand how it is kind of different from qualitative research. The methods of qualitative research are survey, experiment, content analysis, observation, and then we try to find out the structure of an idealized model of quantitative research, and what is actually an idealized model is not necessarily what is followed in reality. So, we need to understand the whole idea of the reason why quantitative research was kind of shaped around positivist, and the objective, the philosophical, metaphysical, logical reason why the sociology was using quantitative research was because of the influence of positivism, which aimed at arriving at objective data through comparison and observation of social reality. In this lecture, the reference is Brian Allen, the book published in 2004, Quantitative and Qualitative Social Research. This part of the lecture is analysis is based on chapter 2, which is on quantitative research. So, reading this chapter will give us a very good understanding of what is quantitative research. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.